The lawman's hand closed around little Thomas's arm, and Mara knew, with the terrible clarity that comes only once in a lifetime, that she had 3 seconds to choose between law and love. The copper pot was heavy in her grip. The children's screams filled the shack, and when Sheriff Dalton turned toward her with that slow, predatory smile, Mara Hale stopped being a child herself. The pot swung, blood sprayed across the wall, and 5 children became fugitives before the body hit the floor. If you want to know whether love can survive when the whole world calls it murder, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Mara's story reaches across this country. The Oklahoma Territory had a way of forgetting people while they were still breathing. Mara Hale had learned this truth at 7 years old, standing beside her mother's grave with dirt under her fingernails and a baby brother screaming in her arms. No preacher came. No neighbors brought food. The world simply turned its back and kept moving, and Mara, small, underfed, unremarkable, did what forgotten people do. She survived. 5 years later, she was still surviving, still invisible, still raising 4 children who weren't hers in a tar paper shack that leaked when it rained and groaned when the wind blew hard across the plains. Thomas was 10 now, all knees and elbows and a smile that came too easy for a boy who'd known so much hunger. Lily was 8, quick-fingered and sharp-eyed, the kind of girl who could spot trouble 3 miles off. The twins, Finn and Rose, were barely 6, small enough to still believe that tomorrow might be better, young enough that Mara killed herself daily to make sure they never learned different. They weren't siblings by blood. They were siblings by abandonment, collected one by one as the territory swallowed their parents and spat out their bones. Thomas's father had died in a mine collapse. Lily's mother had simply walked away one morning and never returned. The twins had been found beside a burned wagon, holding each other and keening like wounded animals. Mara had taken them in because no one else would, because she knew what it felt like to be invisible, because some part of her, the part that hadn't yet calcified into pure survival, still believed that children deserved better than being forgotten. She was 12 years old and responsible for 5 lives, including her own. The territory didn't care. The shack sat at the ragged edge of Salvation Flats, far enough from town that decent folk didn't have to see it, close enough that the children could scavenge what the mercantile threw away. Mara had become an expert at making meals from things other people discarded. Potato peels fried in bacon grease someone else had used twice already. Bread so stale it had to be soaked in water before it could be chewed. Wild onions and dandelion greens that grew in the scrubland behind the shack. She cooked in a dented copper pot she'd found half buried in a trash heap, its bottom scorched black but its body still sound. That pot had kept them alive through 2 winters. Mara polished it every Sunday, the only luxury she allowed herself, rubbing the copper until she could see her own warped reflection in its curve. "Mara, I'm hungry." Rose's voice was small, almost apologetic. It was always Rose who asked. Finn would go silent when his belly cramped, would curl into himself and endure. But Rose was bolder, or maybe just more honest about her needs. Mara looked up from the sorry pile of vegetables on the table. 3 carrots with soft spots, half a cabbage, 2 potatoes starting to sprout eyes. The stew tonight would be thin, again. "I know, sweetheart, supper's coming." "When?" "Soon as I can make it." Thomas appeared in the doorway, his face flushed from running. He'd been in town, doing what Mara had forbidden him to do. Begging outside the saloon, pocketing coins drunk men dropped, taking risks that made her stomach clench with fear. "Got 4 bits," he said, holding up the coins like they were gold. "Man outside the hotel gave me 2 just for carrying his bags." Mara wanted to scold him, wanted to tell him that taking charity was dangerous, that drawing attention was worse, but 4 bits meant flour, meant sugar, meant the twins could have something sweet for once. "Good boy," she said instead, and watched his whole face light up. That was the thing about these children. They were so hungry for approval, for kindness, for any scrap of softness in a world that had given them nothing but edges. Mara tried to give them that softness, even when her own reserves were bone dry. She was slicing the potatoes when she heard the horses. The sound froze her in place, knife suspended over the cutting board. Horses meant visitors, and visitors meant trouble. No one came to the edge of Salvation Flats unless they had business, And people like Mara, people who lived in shacks and raised forgotten children, were nobody's business. Thomas, take the twins to the back room. Mara, teats, now. He heard the steel in her voice and obeyed, scooping up Rose and gesturing for Finn to follow. Lily was already backing toward the wall, her eyes wide and dark. You too, Mara said. I'm staying with you. Lily, I'm staying. There was no time to argue. The horses were close now, their hoofbeats loud on the hard-packed dirt. Mara set down the knife and wiped her hands on her apron, willing her heartbeat to slow, her face to settle into something neutral and unremarkable. The door rattled under a heavy fist. Open up. The voice was familiar. Sheriff Dalton. Mara's stomach turned to ice. She'd seen him around town, a tall man with silver at his temples and a smile that never reached his eyes. He wore his authority like a weapon, casual and always visible. People stepped aside when he walked past. Mothers pulled their children close. Mara had avoided him successfully for months. Until now. She opened the door a crack just wide enough to see his face. Evening, Sheriff. Mara Hale. He said her name like he was tasting something bitter. Been hearing things about you. Don't know what you'd hear about me, sir. I keep to myself. That's the problem. He pushed the door wider, and Mara had no choice but to step back. He entered the shack like he owned it, his eyes cataloging everything. The thin walls, the sparse furniture, the pot on the stove. Little girl like you, raising all these children, people are concerned. Behind him, 2 deputies filled the doorway. One was Hicks, a narrow man with a face like a hatchet. The other was younger, softer around the edges, but his eyes were just as cold. I take care of them just fine. That's not what I heard. Dalton walked slowly around the room, his boots loud on the plank floor. Heard these children are half-starved. Heard you got them begging in the streets. Heard things that make me think maybe they'd be better off somewhere else. Mara's hands curled into fists. They're fed. They're clothed. They're safe. Safe? Dalton laughed, a sound with no humor in it. You're a child yourself. What do you know about keeping anyone safe? More than you think. Is that so? He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. See, the territory's got orphanages now. Good Christian places where children can be raised proper, learn trades, get educated, not scraping by in some trash heap with a little girl playing house. This is our home. This is a hovel. He glanced toward the back room where Mara knew the children were listening, terrified and silent. And those children deserve better. You're not taking them. The words came out harder than she'd intended. Dalton's expression shifted, something dangerous sliding behind his eyes. I don't recall asking your permission, girl. He gestured to the deputies. Hicks moved toward the back room. No. Mara stepped in front of him, her small body a pathetic barrier. You can't just take them. There are laws. I am the law. Dalton's voice was soft now, almost gentle. That made it worse. And I say these children are coming with me. You can make this easy, or you can make it hard. Your choice. Hicks pushed past her. She heard Thomas shout, heard Rose start to cry. Lily appeared in the doorway, her face white with terror. Mara, don't let them... Get your hands off her! Mara lunged forward, but the young deputy caught her arm, his grip bruising. Don't make this worse, he muttered. But it was already worse. Hicks was dragging Thomas out of the back room, the boy fighting and kicking. Finn was screaming. Rose had latched onto the doorframe and was refusing to let go. Please, Mara's voice cracked. Please, they're all I have. They're all each other has. Dalton looked at her with something that might have been pity on another man's face. On him, it was contempt. Your children raising children. It's unnatural. This is for the best. The best? Lily's voice was shrill. You're going to sell us. Everyone knows what you do. You take kids and you sell them to work farms and factories and... The slap came so fast, Mara almost missed it. Lily's head snapped to the side and she crumpled against the wall. Everything stopped. The room went silent except for Rose's hitching sobs. Mara stared at Lily's crumpled form, at the red mark blooming on her cheek, at the casual way Dalton lowered his hand. Mouthy little thing, he said. Orphanage will fix that. Something in Mara broke. not shattered. Breaking implied weakness, fragility. What happened to Mara in that moment was more like a lock snapping open, releasing something that had been caged too long. Her hand found the copper pot on the stove. It was still warm from the fire, heavy with half-cooked stew. She lifted it without thinking, without planning, without anything but the pure animal instinct that comes when someone threatens your children. Dalton was turning toward her, his mouth open to say something else cruel and dismissive, when Mara swung the pot with every ounce of strength in her 12-year-old body. The impact made a sound like a melon splitting. Dalton dropped like a felled tree, blood pouring from the gash above his ear. The pot clanged to the floor, stew splattering across the boards. For one impossible second, no one moved. Then Hicks lunged for her. "You little bitch!" Thomas grabbed a chair and swung it into Hicks's knees. The deputy went down hard, cursing. The young deputy fumbled for his gun, his face slack with shock. "Don't." Mara's voice was steady now, cold as river stones. She'd picked up the pot again, and her eyes were locked on his. "Don't make me!" He looked at her, really looked, and whatever he saw made him take a step back. "You just assaulted a sheriff," he said. "You're done. You're all done." "We were done the minute he walked through that door." Mara's hands were shaking now, but her voice held firm. "Get out." "He's bleeding." "Get out." Hicks was pulling himself up, his face twisted with rage and pain, but the young deputy was already backing toward the door, his hands raised. "This isn't over," Hicks snarled. "It is for tonight." Mara raised the pot again. "Next person through that door doesn't get a warning." They left, half-dragging Dalton between them. His blood left a trail across the floor, dark and accusatory. The moment the door slammed, Mara's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor, the pot clattering from her grip. Her whole body was shaking now, violent tremors that rattled her teeth. Lily crawled over and pressed against her side. Thomas gathered the twins and brought them close. They huddled together in the middle of the shack, 5 children wrapped around each other like they could make a fortress of their own small bodies. "What do we do?" Thomas's voice was barely a whisper. Mara looked at the blood on the floor, at the overturned furniture, at the faces of the children who depended on her. She thought about orphanages, about children sold to factories and work farms, about Dalton's smile and the casual violence of his hand against Lily's face. She thought about the stories she'd heard, whispered tales of sheriffs who ran side businesses, who made children disappear into networks of exploitation and misery, about how no one questioned the law, even when the law was rotten. "We run," she said. "Run where?" Mara didn't know, but she knew geography, the maps Thomas had stolen from the schoolhouse. She knew there were mountains to the north, wild country where the law's reach grew thin. She knew that staying meant death or worse. "North," she said, "into the high country. There's a settlement called Briar Ridge, maybe 50 miles. If we can get there—" 50 miles? Lily's voice was small. "Mara, the twins can't walk 50 miles. "Then we'll carry them." "What about food, water? We got nothing." "We got each other." Mara pulled them all closer, fierce and desperate. "And that's enough. It has to be enough." They packed in the dark, moving fast and silent. Mara took the copper pot, cleaned of blood, still dented, still theirs. She took blankets and what little food they had. Thomas filled a canteen from the rain barrel. Lily bundled the twins in every piece of clothing they owned. Within an hour of the attack, they were gone. The night swallowed them whole. The first 2 days were the hardest. They moved north through scrubland and prairie, following creek beds and animal trails. Mara kept them off the roads, knowing that Dalton's men would be searching. The twins took turns being carried, Thomas hauling Finn, Mara with Rose on her back. Lily scouted ahead, her sharp eyes watching for riders. They had no tent, no shelter. They slept in thickets and under rock overhangs, pressed together for warmth. The April nights were still cold, frost painting the grass silver by morning. On the 3rd day, they reached the foothills. The mountains rose ahead of them like a promise or a threat, depending on how you looked at them. Mara had never seen anything so big, so indifferent. The peaks were still capped with snow despite the spring thaw, and the forests that climbed their slopes were dense and dark. "Are we going to die out here?" Finn asked. His voice was matter-of-fact, curious rather than afraid. "No," Mara said. "You promise?" She looked down at him, this small boy who'd already lost everything once and was being asked to trust her with his life. I promise. It was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that parents told children, the kind that said, I will fight until there's nothing left of me to keep you safe. And Mara had learned to be a parent long before she'd had any right to the title. They climbed higher, the air grew thinner, cleaner. The smell of pine was everywhere, sharp and green. Mara's lungs burned with the effort, but she kept moving. On the 5th day, they ran out of food. The children didn't complain. They'd been hungry before, had learned to endure the hollow ache in their bellies. But Mara saw the way their steps grew slower, the way their faces grew pinched and pale. She needed to find help, needed to risk approaching someone, anyone. That evening, as they huddled in a shallow cave, Lily touched her arm. Mara, look. Smoke. A thin ribbon of it rising from somewhere deeper in the forest. Could be a camp, Thomas said. Could be dangerous. Could be food, Lily countered. Mara made the decision. We go careful. We watch first. If it looks safe, I'll approach. Alone. Mara say, alone, she repeated. You 4 stay hidden. If something goes wrong, you run. You hear me? You run and you don't look back. They followed the smoke through the darkening forest. It led them to a clearing where a cabin stood, small and solid, smoke curling from its chimney. A corral held 2 horses. Firewood was stacked neat against the wall. Someone lived here. Someone prepared. Someone who might have mercy or might have a gun. Mara left the children hidden in the trees and approached alone. The cabin door opened before she reached it. The man who stepped out was tall, broad-shouldered, somewhere in his 30s. His face was weathered, hard-lined, with eyes the color of winter sky. He held a rifle loose in his hands, not aimed but ready. That's close enough, he said. Mara stopped, raised her hands, tried to make herself look harmless, which wasn't difficult given that she was a half-starved 12-year-old girl covered in trail dust. I'm not here to cause trouble. Most trouble doesn't announce itself. He looked past her, scanning the trees. You alone? She hesitated. Lying felt wrong, but the truth felt dangerous. I have children with me, 4 of them. We've been walking for days. We need help. Then you've come to the wrong place. His voice was flat, final. I don't do help. Please, I'm not asking for much, just no. He started to turn back toward the cabin. I can cook. The words came out desperate, sharp. The man paused. What? I can cook, Mara repeated. She gripped the copper pot she'd been carrying, held it up like an offering. You got food? I can make it into something good. I can clean. I can work. I just need somewhere safe for the children to sleep. One night, that's all I'm asking. He studied her for a long moment. She saw the refusal forming in his eyes, saw him about to close the door on them permanently. Then his gaze dropped to the pot in her hands, to the dents in its copper surface, to her raw, blistered fingers. Something shifted in his expression, not softening. This man didn't look like he'd softened in years, but something. One night, he said finally, you cause trouble, you're gone. You steal from me, you're gone. You make noise, attract attention, or generally make me regret this decision. We'll be gone, I understand. He jerked his head toward the cabin. Bring them in before it gets full dark. Bears come down this time of year. Mara's legs nearly gave out with relief. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. He looked at her with those cold winter eyes. You don't know what you're walking into. But Mara did know. She was walking into a chance. A single night of shelter, warmth, safety. Tomorrow could take care of itself. She whistled, the signal she'd taught the children. They emerged from the trees like small ghosts, Thomas with Finn on his back, Lily holding Rose's hand. Their faces were exhausted, hopeful, afraid. The man watched them approach with an expression Mara couldn't read. When they were all gathered on his porch, small and filthy, and trying not to cry with relief, he finally spoke. Name's Rowan Black, he said. This is my mountain. You follow my rules, we won't have problems. Yes, sir, Mara said. My name's Mara Hale. This is Thomas, Lily, Finn, and Rose. Rowan looked at each child in turn, his gaze lingering on their thin frames and hollow eyes. Whatever he saw there made his jaw tighten. "You got anything besides that pot?" "2 blankets, a canteen, some rope." "That's it?" "That's it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Get inside. I'll see about food." The cabin was small but solid, built from thick logs chinked with mud and moss. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its fire burning steady and warm. There was a table, 2 chairs, shelves lined with supplies. A bed in the corner, neatly made. Everything was clean, organized, maintained with the care of someone who lived alone and liked it that way. The children stood just inside the door, afraid to move, afraid to touch anything. Rowan went to the shelves and pulled down flour, salt, dried meat. He set them on the table with the thud of finality. "You said you can cook. Prove it." Mara looked at the ingredients, her mind already cataloging possibilities. It had been so long since she'd had real supplies to work with, since she'd been able to make something beyond survival rations. "I'll need water," she said. "Pumps outside. And I'll need to use your fire." "Use what you need. Just make it worth my while." He went outside then, leaving them alone. The children looked at Mara with wide eyes, seeking reassurance. "It's okay," she whispered. "We're safe here. For tonight, we're safe." Thomas helped her pump water. Lily found a skillet. Mara set to work with the focus that had kept them alive this long, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She made biscuits first. The dough rolled thin to stretch the flour. Then she fried the dried meat with wild onions she'd collected days ago, the ones she'd been saving for an emergency. The smell filled the cabin, rich and savory, the kind of smell that meant safety and warmth and home. Rose crept close to the fire, her small hands extended toward the heat. Finn curled up in the corner, his eyes already closing. Thomas and Lily sat at the table, watching Mara work with the devotion of children who knew she was all that stood between them and the void. When Rowan came back inside, his arms full of more firewood, he stopped in the doorway. His eyes tracked to the skillet, to the biscuits cooling on a cloth, to the children arranged around his cabin like they'd always belonged there. "Smells good," he said gruffly. "It'll be ready soon." He set down the wood and washed his hands in a basin, methodical and thorough. When Mara served the food, he ate in silence, his expression unreadable. The children ate like they were starving, because they were. Mara watched them more than she ate herself, making sure everyone got enough, rationing her own portion to make sure there were seconds for the twins. When the meal was done, Rowan pushed back from the table. "That was good," he said. It sounded like the words cost him something. "Thank you for the supplies. You earned them." He looked at the children, at their drooping eyelids and exhausted faces. "They can sleep in front of the fire. I got extra blankets." "We don't want to impose, you're already imposing." But there was no heat in his words. Might as well do it properly. He produced blankets from a trunk, thick wool that smelled like cedar and smoke. Mara helped the children settle, tucking them in the way she'd done 1,000 times before. Within minutes, all 4 were asleep, their breathing soft and even. Mara stayed awake, sitting by the fire with the copper pot in her lap. She cleaned it carefully, scrubbing away the last traces of the journey, the last evidence of what she'd done to Dalton. Rowan sat in his chair across from her, whittling a piece of wood. The knife moved in steady, practiced strokes. "You running from the law?" he asked quietly. Mara's hand stilled. "Why would you think that? Children don't walk 50 miles into the mountains for fun, and you got the look of someone who's running scared." She considered lying, considered silence, but something about this man, his bluntness, his rough kindness, made her want to tell the truth. "I hit a sheriff," she said, "with this pot. Split his head open. He was trying to take the children." Rowan's knife paused for just a heartbeat, then continued its steady rhythm. "He deserve it? Yes. Then you did right. The law won't see it that way. The law is often wrong." He looked at her directly, his winter eyes sharp. "You kill him?" "I don't know. I didn't stay to check." "Smart." He returned to his whittling. "How long you planning to run?" "As long as I have to." "That's not a plan. That's a prayer." Mara felt tears prick her eyes, hot and shameful. "It's all I've got." Rowan was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled. The children breathed softly in their sleep. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like the ocean. I said one night, he finally spoke. I remember. But I'm thinking maybe one night isn't enough. Mara looked up sharply. What? You can cook. You're not stupid. You know how to work. He gestured around the cabin. Place could use someone who knows how to make it more than just shelter, and those children need more than running. You're saying we can stay? I'm saying you can earn your keep. Nothing's free. You work, you get to stay. You slack, you're gone. Same rules as before. For how long? Until you're not running anymore. Until those children are safe. Until... He stopped, his jaw working. Until whatever needs to happen happens. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to say they couldn't impose, couldn't burden him. But the words died in her throat because she knew, with the same terrible clarity that had made her swing that copper pot, that she had no better options. This was mercy, rough, grudging, offered with all the warmth of a winter stone. But mercy, nonetheless. Thank you, she whispered. Rowan stood abruptly, like the gratitude made him uncomfortable. Don't thank me. Just don't make me regret this. He went to his bed and lay down fully clothed, turning his face to the wall. Mara sat by the fire with her sleeping children around her and let herself cry. Quietly, so no one would hear. Tears of relief and exhaustion and terror and hope all mixed together. They'd found shelter. For now, that was enough. Outside, the mountain kept its ancient vigil, indifferent and eternal. And somewhere far below, Sheriff Dalton, alive or dead, she didn't know, would be coming for them. But tonight, in this small cabin at the edge of the world, 5 children slept warm and fed. And Mara Hale, 12 years old and carrying the weight of 5 lives, allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The fire burned low, the stars wheeled overhead, and the mountain, silent and strong, held them all in its vast, uncaring embrace. Morning came cold and gray, mist clinging to the mountain like something alive. Mara woke to find Rowan already gone, the cabin empty except for the sleeping children and a note weighted down by a tin cup on the table. Wood needs splitting, pump needs priming, don't touch my rifle. She stared at the words, rough and blocky, written by a hand more accustomed to axes than pens. No greeting, no instructions beyond the bare minimum, just expectations. Mara folded the note carefully and set it aside. Then she got to work. The children woke slowly, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Rose sat up first, her eyes wide as she took in the solid walls, the banked fire, the morning light streaming through real glass windows. Are we still here? She whispered, like speaking too loud might shatter the dream. We're still here. Is the man going to make us leave? Mara thought about the note, about the unspoken bargain hanging in the air. Not if we prove ourselves useful. Thomas stretched, his joints popping. What do you need me to do? Help me figure out where everything is. We need to make breakfast before he gets back. They explored the cabin with the cautious efficiency of children who'd learned not to take anything for granted. The shelves held staples, flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork wrapped in cloth. There was coffee in a tin, real sugar in a jar. Luxuries Mara hadn't seen in months. She made porridge, thick and sweet, and fried strips of salt pork until they were crispy at the edges. The smell filled the cabin, mingling with the pine smoke and the clean mountain air that seeped through the chinking. Rowan returned as she was setting the table. He came through the door like a force of nature, carrying an armload of split wood and smelling of sweat and pine sap. He barely glanced at them as he stacked the wood by the fireplace. Breakfast ready? His voice was gruff, still edged with sleep. Yes, sir. He washed at the basin and sat without ceremony. The children watched him nervously, waiting for permission to eat. He noticed their hesitation and jerked his chin toward the table. Sit. Food's no good cold. They ate in silence, broken only by the scrape of spoons on tin plates. Rowan finished first, pushing back from the table with a grunt that might have been satisfaction. You, he said, pointing at Thomas. How old are you? 10, sir. You know how to swing an axe? A little. Not good enough. I'll teach you proper. Can't have dead weight on this mountain. He turned to Lily. You. What are you good at? Lily's chin came up. I can sew, and I can track. Track what? Animals, people, anything that leaves a trail. Rowan's eyes narrowed with something that might have been interest. We'll see about that. He looked at the twins, his expression softening just slightly. You two are too small for heavy work, but you can gather kindling, help with the cooking. Everyone pulls their weight here. Understood? 4 small voices answered in unison. Yes, sir. And you, he said finally, looking at Mara. You got a bargain to keep. This cabin hasn't had a proper cleaning in 5 years. I expect that to change. It will? He stood, reaching for his coat. I'll be checking the trap line. Be back by midday. Don't wander off the property. Bears aren't the only dangerous things in these mountains. The door closed behind him with a finality that left them all exhaling in relief. He's scary, Rose said quietly. He's letting us stay, Mara countered. That's what matters. She set the children to tasks, organizing their efforts the way she'd done for years. Thomas went outside to practice with the kindling axe Rowan had left near the woodpile. Lily took the twins to gather pine cones and small branches. Mara tackled the cabin itself. It wasn't dirty exactly, but it carried the particular neglect of a place maintained by someone who'd stopped caring about comfort. The floors needed sweeping, the shelves needed organizing, the corners held dust and cobwebs and the accumulated grime of years spent alone. Mara worked with fierce determination, scrubbing and sorting and transforming the space one small section at a time. She found things as she cleaned: a woman's shawl folded in a trunk, its edges moth-eaten; a small wooden horse hand-carved and gathering dust on a high shelf; a daguerreotype in a cracked frame showing a younger Rowan standing beside a woman with kind eyes and a baby in her arms. She studied the photograph for a long moment, seeing the ghost of something softer in Rowan's face, something that had been worn away by time and grief. Then she wrapped it carefully and placed it back in the trunk where she'd found it. Some wounds weren't hers to touch. By the time Rowan returned, the cabin had been transformed. The floors gleamed. The shelves were organized by content and frequency of use. Fresh pine boughs hung over the doorway, filling the air with their sharp, clean scent. A pot of beans simmered over the fire, and bread dough was rising in a bowl near the hearth. Rowan stopped in the doorway, his eyes tracking over the changes. His jaw worked like he was chewing words he didn't know how to say. It's clean, he finally managed. Yes, sir. Smells different. Pine boughs, they help with the smoke smell. He grunted, neither approval nor disapproval, and hung his coat on the peg. Thomas came in behind him, his face flushed with exertion and pride. Mr. Black showed me how to split wood proper, he announced. Said I got decent form for a beginner. Did he now? Mara looked at Rowan, who was studiously avoiding her gaze. Boy's not hopeless, Rowan muttered. Needs work, but he's teachable. Over the next week, they fell into a rhythm. Rowan would rise before dawn and disappear into the forest, checking traps, hunting, doing whatever solitary work sustained him. The children would tackle their assigned tasks. Thomas splitting kindling and learning to maintain the tools, Lily scouting the nearby areas and memorizing landmarks, the twins helping Mara with cooking and cleaning. And Mara became the axis around which the household turned. She cooked meals that made even Rowan pause mid-bite. She mended clothes with careful stitches, making their meager supplies last. She organized supplies, rationed carefully, made the cabin feel less like a hermit's cave and more like a home. Rowan watched all of this with the wary distance of a man who'd been alone too long to trust easily. But Mara noticed small changes. He started leaving game cleaned and ready for cooking instead of just dumping it on the porch. He showed Thomas how to set snares, spoke to him with rough patience. He even smiled once when Rose presented him with a bouquet of wildflowers, though he tried to hide it behind his hand. You're softening him, Lily observed one evening as they washed dishes. I'm not trying to soften anyone. I'm just trying to keep us alive. Same thing, maybe. Mara dried a plate, considering. He's letting us stay. That's more than most would do. You think he knows about the sheriff? I told him, Lily's hands stilled in the wash water, and he didn't throw us out. He said the law is often wrong. Huh. Lily resumed scrubbing. Maybe he's got his own reasons for hiding up here. Mara thought about the photograph in the trunk, about the careful way Rowan avoided any mention of his past. Maybe he does. 2 weeks into their stay, Rowan came back from town with supplies and a newspaper. He tossed it on the table without comment, but Mara saw the tension in his shoulders. She waited until the children were asleep before unfolding it. The headline made her stomach drop. Sheriff Dalton recovering after brutal attack, child assailant still at large. The article was brief but damning. It described Mara as dangerous and disturbed, claimed she'd attacked without provocation, suggested the children she'd been caring for were likely victims of abuse and neglect. There was a reward offered for information leading to her capture. $500. Mara's hands shook as she read. $500 was enough to make anyone a bounty hunter, enough to make neighbors turn suspicious, enough to make their refuge feel suddenly very fragile. He's alive, then. Rowan's voice came from the shadows near his bed. She'd thought he was asleep. Yes. Disappointed? Mara folded the paper carefully. I never wanted to kill him. I just wanted him to leave us alone. Men like that don't leave people alone. Rowan sat up, his face shadowed. They take what they want and call it righteousness. You know men like him? I've known all kinds of men. Most of them aren't worth the powder to blow them to hell. He was quiet for a moment. That article's a lie, about you being dangerous. How do you know? Because dangerous people don't clean cabins and mend socks and make sure everyone eats before they take their own portion. He stood, crossing to the fireplace. Dangerous people take. You give. There's a difference. Mara felt something tight in her chest loosen slightly. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just telling you what I see. He poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. That reward's going to bring trouble, though. $500 is a lot of money to poor folk. I know. Briar Ridge is only 30 miles from here. People pass through. Someone might recognize you. So what do we do? Rowan stared into the flames for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. We keep our heads down. We don't go to town. We make sure no one has reason to come looking up here. We? He glanced at her, and for just a moment his expression was almost gentle. You're here now, under my roof. That makes you my responsibility, whether I like it or not. He returned to his bed, settling back against the wall. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be hard work. Tomorrow's always hard work. Then you'll be used to it. Spring deepened into early summer. The snow melted from the high peaks, revealing meadows thick with wildflowers. The children grew stronger on regular meals and clean air, their faces losing the pinched look of chronic hunger. Thomas shot up 2 inches and filled out through the shoulders. Lily's tracking skills impressed even Rowan, who took her with him sometimes when he checked the trap lines. The twins lost some of their fearful watchfulness, started playing in the meadow behind the cabin, their laughter ringing through the trees like bells. Mara watched these changes with fierce gratitude. This was what safety looked like. This was what children deserved. But safety was an illusion, and she knew it. The first sign of trouble came on a humid afternoon in June. Lily burst into the cabin, her face pale. Someone's coming. 3 men on horseback, maybe an hour out. Rowan was on his feet instantly. You sure? I saw them from the ridge. They're following the creek trail. Could be hunters, could be prospectors. Could be bounty hunters, Mara said quietly. Rowan's jaw tightened. He grabbed his rifle from above the door, checked the load with practiced efficiency. Thomas, take the twins into the root cellar. Lily, you go with them. Mara, I'm staying. The hell you are. If these men are looking for you, then they've already seen the smoke from the chimney. They know someone's here. Mara's voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her. Running now just makes us look guilty. You are guilty. Of protecting children. Yes, she met his eyes. But I won't hide like a criminal. Not anymore. Rowan looked like he wanted to argue, but voices were already echoing through the trees. Rough male laughter, the jingle of harnesses. He cursed under his breath. Fine. But you let me do the talking, and if things go wrong, you get those children and you run. Understand? Rowan. Understand? Yes. He positioned himself on the porch, rifle held casual but ready. Mara stood in the doorway, visible but not prominent. The children were hidden in the root cellar, its entrance concealed beneath a rug in the corner. The three men rode into the clearing with the easy confidence of people who expected no resistance. They were rough-looking, dressed in trail-worn clothes and carrying an assortment of weapons. The leader was a barrel-chested man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. "Afternoon," Rowan called out, his voice flat and unwelcoming. The scarred man reined in his horse. "Afternoon yourself. Name's Garrett. These are my associates, Cole and Dutch. We're looking for someone." Lots of people look for lots of things in these mountains. Usually don't find them. Garrett smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're looking for a girl, about 12 years old, traveling with 4 younger children. There's a reward for information." "I've heard about that reward. $500 for a child. Hell of a thing. Child who cracked a sheriff's skull open with a cooking pot. Makes her dangerous, wouldn't you say?" "Makes her desperate. There's a difference." Rowan shifted slightly, the rifle moving just enough to be noticeable. "Either way, I haven't seen any children up here. Just me and my wife." Mara's breath caught. Wife. Garrett's eyes slid to her, assessing. "That's so. You folks live up here alone?" "Prefer it that way," Rowan said. "Don't care much for visitors." "Well now, that's unfriendly." Garrett dismounted, his companions following suit. "We've been riding hard all day. Least you could do is offer some water for our horses." "Pump's there, help yourself." But Garrett was already moving toward the cabin, his gaze roaming over the well-maintained yard, the neat woodpile, the garden plot Mara had started near the porch. "Nice place you got here, real domestic. We get by." "I bet you do." He stopped at the porch steps, close enough now that Mara could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Your wife doesn't talk much, does she? She's shy around strangers." "Is that right?" Garrett looked directly at Mara. "What's your name, darling?" Mara's mind raced. Any name she gave could be checked, verified, used against her, but silence would be just as suspicious. "Sarah," she said quietly. "Sarah Black." "Sarah Black." Garrett rolled the name around like he was tasting it. "You look awful young to be married." "Mountain folk marry young," Rowan interjected. "Now you've watered your horses and wasted enough of my time. Move along." "Not quite yet." Garrett turned back to him. "See, thing is, we've been tracking these fugitives for weeks, and we heard tell there was smoke coming from this mountain. Smoke means people, and people mean questions. I've answered your questions. There's no fugitives here. Mind if we look around, just to be sure?" "Yeah, I mind." Rowan's voice went cold. "This is my property. You got no authority here." "We got the authority of $500. Cole spoke up for the first time, his hand resting on his pistol. "That buys a lot of cooperation." "Not for me, it doesn't." The tension stretched taut as wire. Mara could feel violence hovering in the air, waiting for an excuse to break loose. Her hand inched toward the copper pot she kept always within reach. Then Dutch, the third man, spoke up from near the pump. "Garrett, we got nothing here. Just a mountain man and his wife, like he says. Let's move on to Briar Ridge, check the settlements." Garrett didn't move, his eyes locked on Rowan's. It was a test of wills, silent and dangerous. Finally he smiled. "You're right, Dutch. We're wasting time." He backed away from the porch, hands spread in mock surrender. "Sorry to trouble you folks. You have a real nice day now." They mounted up and rode out, but slowly. Garrett looked back twice, his expression thoughtful. Mara and Rowan stood frozen until the hoofbeats faded completely into the forest. Then Rowan lowered the rifle and released a long breath. "They'll be back," he said. "I know. Soon as they don't find anything in Briar Ridge, they'll come back here with more questions, more suspicion." Mara thought about the way Garrett had looked at her, the calculations happening behind his eyes. "We need to leave. Tonight." "No." She stared at him. "Rowan, if they come back, we'll deal with it. But running now just confirms their suspicions." He set the rifle down and turned to face her fully. "You've spent your whole life running, Mara. From poverty, from the law, from people who should have protected you. At some point, you have to stop." "And do what? Fight them?" "There were 3 of them today. Next time there could be 10. Then we make sure there isn't a next time." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I've been thinking. That article in the paper, it's all lies. Dalton's version of events. But what if there was another version? What if people knew the truth? Who would believe a 12-year-old girl over a sheriff? People who've seen what sheriffs do when no one's watching. People who know the law doesn't always mean justice. He crossed to the trunk where he kept his supplies and pulled out paper and a pencil. You're going to write down what happened, every detail, why you were caring for those children, what Dalton tried to do, why you defended yourself. Rowan, that won't change anything. Maybe not, but it's evidence, it's your testimony. He thrust the paper toward her. And if something happens to you, if they take you away, at least the truth will exist somewhere. At least people will know. Mara took the paper with trembling hands. The idea of putting it all into words, of making permanent the horror of that night, felt overwhelming. But Rowan was right. She'd been running. And running had only brought her here, to another moment of crisis, another choice between hiding and standing firm. She sat at the table and began to write. The words came slowly at first, halting and uncertain. But then they flowed, years of survival and struggle pouring onto the page. She wrote about her mother's death, about each child she'd taken in, about the grinding poverty and the constant fear. She wrote about Dalton's visit, his threats, the casual violence of his hand against Lily's face. She wrote about the copper pot and the choice that came in 3 seconds. When she finished, the sun had set. Her hand ached and the paper was covered in her cramped, careful script. Rowan read it over her shoulder, his breathing steady and even. "This is good," he said. "This is true. What do we do with it? We hide it, and if they come for you, we make sure it gets to someone who matters, a judge, a newspaper, someone who might actually give a damn." He took the pages and wrapped them carefully in oilcloth, then tucked them high in the rafters where they couldn't be easily found. That night, they let the children out of the root cellar and tried to explain what was happening without terrifying them completely. Thomas listened with his jaw set, already trying to be the man he wasn't yet old enough to be. Lily's eyes were hard and calculating. The twins just pressed close to Mara, seeking reassurance she couldn't quite give. "Are they going to take us away?" Rose asked. "Not if I can help it, but what if they do?" Mara pulled her close, breathing in the little girl's smell of her hair, sunshine and pine sap and the soap they'd made together. "Then you remember that I fought for you, that I'll always fight for you, and you find a way to fight back." "I'm scared." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." The next 2 weeks were tense, every sound in the forest a potential threat. But the bounty hunters didn't return. The mountain remained quiet, wrapped in its summer heat and the drone of insects. They began to relax, to hope that maybe Garrett had moved on to easier quarry. That hope died on a Tuesday morning when Lily came running from her scouting route, her face stark with fear. "They're burning the valley," she gasped. "I saw smoke. Lots of it, coming from Briar Ridge." Rowan grabbed his spyglass and climbed to the ridge. When he came back, his face was grim. "Town's on fire. I can see riders in the streets. They're tearing the place apart." "Looking for us?" Mara said. "Looking for anyone who might be hiding you. They're going house to house, burning out anyone who won't cooperate." His hands clenched into fists. "This is what $500 buys. This is what happens when you put a price on a child's head." Thomas was pale, but steady. "What do we do?" Rowan looked at each of them in turn. These children he'd reluctantly sheltered. This ragtag family he'd never meant to collect. Something shifted in his expression, some final wall coming down. "We fight," he said. "We stop running, and we fight." "How?" Mara asked. "We're one man and 5 children against corruption, against injustice, against a system that treats children like commodities." He turned to her. "You wrote your testimony. Now we make sure people hear it. We take the fight to them." "That's suicide." "Maybe, but I'm tired of hiding." He looked around the cabin at the home they'd built together. "This mountain was supposed to be my grave, a place to wait out my days until they ended. But you came here. You brought life back to a dead place. And I'll be damned if I let them burn that away." Mara felt tears prick her eyes. "Rowan, I've lost everything once before. Wife, Daughter, everything that mattered. His voice was rough with old pain. I won't lose it again, not without a fight. The children were watching him with something like awe. Here was this hard, closed man, opening himself to them, choosing them, standing with them when he could have thrown them to the wolves weeks ago. So what's the plan? Thomas asked. Rowan smiled, and it was a fierce, dangerous expression. We make them come to us. And when they do, we make sure they regret it. He began issuing orders, his voice steady and certain. Thomas would help set traps around the perimeter. Lily would establish watching posts. Mara would prepare supplies for a long siege or a quick escape, whichever became necessary. As they worked, smoke continued to rise from the valley, a dark stain against the summer sky. Somewhere down there, people were suffering because of her, because she dared to protect children no one else wanted. The guilt was crushing, but beneath it ran something harder, something forged in the same fire that had made her swing that copper pot. Determination. She'd spent her whole life being told she was worth little, that children like her and Thomas and Lily and the twins didn't matter, that they were disposable. But they'd survived. They'd found each other. They'd built something here on this mountain, something fragile but real, and she would defend it with everything she had. The sun set over the mountains, painting the smoke gold and crimson. In the cabin, 5 children and 1 broken man prepared for war. And somewhere in the valley below, violence was coming closer, drawn by the promise of $500 and the kind of cruelty that called itself righteousness. But this time, Mara wasn't running. This time, she would stand. They came at dawn 3 days later, when the mist still clung to the mountain and the world was caught between darkness and light. Lily spotted them first from her watching post in the tall pine, her sharp eyes catching movement where the trail bent around the creek. She didn't call out. Rowan had taught her better than that. Instead, she slid down the tree and ran silent as a deer through the forest, her bare feet finding purchase on roots and stones. She burst into the cabin breathless. 12 men, maybe more behind them. They've got torches. Rowan was already moving, grabbing his rifle and the shotgun he'd cleaned the night before. How long? 20 minutes if they're careful, 10 if they're not. They won't be careful. Men with torches never are. He turned to Mara. Get the children to the cave, now. They'd prepared for this. 2 miles northeast, hidden behind a waterfall, was a shallow cave that Rowan had stocked with supplies, blankets, dried food, water. It wasn't comfortable, but it was defensible and almost impossible to find unless you knew exactly where to look. I'm not leaving you here alone, Mara said. You are, and you're taking them with you. His voice was iron. This isn't a discussion. Rowan, Mara. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip fierce. I can hold them off. I know this mountain, know every rock and tree and hiding place. But I can't do that and protect 5 children. You want to help? Then get them safe. Let me do what I do best. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that splitting up was madness, that they were stronger together. But Thomas was already gathering the twins, and Lily had the emergency pack slung over her shoulder, and the smoke from the valley was still visible in the distance, a reminder of what happened to people who sheltered fugitives. Don't die, she said. Wasn't planning on it. He almost smiled. Been alone too long to get killed now that I've got a reason to stay alive. He shoved her toward the door. Go. And Mara? If I don't come back, that testimony in the rafters, you make sure it reaches someone who matters. You'll come back. If I can. She gathered the children and ran. Thomas carried Rose. Lily led Finn by the hand, and Mara brought up the rear with the copper pot strapped to her back and fear clawing at her throat. They moved fast through the forest, following the route Rowan had made them practice a dozen times. Behind them, the first gunshot split the morning air. Mara forced herself not to look back, forced herself to keep moving even as her heart screamed at her to turn around, to help, to stand with the man who'd given them everything when he owed them nothing. But the children needed her more. They reached the waterfall as the sun broke over the eastern peaks, turning the cascade to liquid gold. The roar of falling water masked their approach as they scrambled up the slick rocks behind it, squeezing through the narrow gap that led to the cave. Inside, it was dark and damp and smelled of stone and mineral water. But it was safe. Hidden. The children huddled together while Mara positioned herself at the entrance, where she could see out through the curtain of falling water without being seen. Is Mr. Black going to be okay? Rose's voice was very small. He's the toughest man I've ever met, Mara said, willing it to be true. He'll be fine. More gunshots echoed across the mountain, a staccato percussion that made her flinch. She counted the reports, trying to distinguish Rowan's rifle from the others, trying to gauge how the fight was going from sound alone. Hours crawled past. The children dozed fitfully, exhausted by fear and the hard run. Mara stayed awake, watching, listening, her hand wrapped around the handle of the copper pot like it was a talisman. Noon came and went. The gunfire had stopped an hour earlier, leaving a silence that was somehow worse than the violence. Mara strained her ears for any sound, voices, footsteps, anything that would tell her what had happened. Nothing but the eternal thunder of the waterfall. "We should go back," Thomas said. He'd woken and moved beside her, his young face set in determined lines. "We should help him. We stay here." Those were his orders. He could be hurt. He told us to wait. But doubt was eating at her. What if Rowan was lying wounded somewhere, bleeding out while she hid like a coward? What if the bounty hunters had taken him, were torturing him for information about where the children had gone? What if she'd let another person sacrifice themselves for her when she should have stayed and fought? The sun was lowering toward the western peaks when Lily touched her arm. "Someone's coming." Mara's whole body went tense. She peered through the water, saw movement in the trees across the creek, a single figure moving with the careful gait of someone injured or exhausted. Rowan. She recognized the shape of him even at a distance, the set of his shoulders, the way he favored his left leg. Relief flooded through her so powerfully she nearly wept. But she waited. Rowan had taught her caution, had drilled into them all the importance of making sure before acting. So she watched as he approached the waterfall, as he stopped at the edge of the creek and spoke clearly into the roaring water. "Mara, it's me. They're gone. It's safe." Still she waited, watched him cup his hands and drink from the creek, watched him wince as he straightened, looked for signs of coercion, of weapons pointed from the trees, of any indication this was a trap. Finally satisfied, she led the children down from the cave. Rowan looked like he'd been through hell. His shirt was torn and darkened with blood. His own or someone else's, Mara couldn't tell. His face was smudged with powder smoke, and there was a gash above his right eye that had bled into his beard. But he was standing. He was alive. "You're hurt," she said. "I'm standing. That's what counts." He reached out and ruffled Rose's hair with a gentleness that seemed impossible given what he'd just endured. "You all okay?" "We're fine. What happened?" "They came hard and stupid, which is how I prefer my enemies. Set fire to the cabin thinking they'd flush me out." His jaw tightened. Didn't work the way they planned. "The cabin, still standing, mostly. Fire caught the porch, but I got it out before it spread." He started walking, slow and stiff. "Come on. We need to move before more show up." They followed him back through the forest. The sun was setting by the time they reached the clearing, painting everything in shades of amber and crimson. The cabin stood scarred, but defiant, one side blackened by fire, windows broken, but its bones intact. Bodies lay scattered around the property. Mara stopped, her hand instinctively covering Rose's eyes. "How many?" "4 dead. 3 ran when they figured out I wasn't going down easy. The rest scattered when I set off the powder charges under the south approach." He said it matter-of-factly, like he was describing the weather. "They'll regroup, probably bring more men. We bought time, not victory." He led them inside. The cabin was a wreck, furniture overturned, shelves ransacked, windows shattered. But it was still shelter, still theirs. Thomas and Lily set about cleaning while Rowan collapsed into his chair. Mara brought water and cloth, knelt beside him despite his protest. "I can handle it," he growled. "Shut up and let me help." The gash above his eye was deep but clean. She washed it carefully, her fingers steady despite the tremor in her chest. Up close, she could see how exhausted he was, how much the fight had cost him. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for what you did, for protecting us." "Didn't do it for thanks." "I know, but you have it anyway." He caught her hand, his grip warm and calloused. "They'll come back, Mara. With more men, more weapons. and next time I might not be able to hold them. Then what do we do? He was silent for a long moment, staring into the empty fireplace. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with a decision already made. You go to the authorities. The real ones, not Dalton's bought and paid for cronies. You take that testimony to the territorial marshal in Canyon Falls. You tell him everything. They'll arrest me. They'll take the children. Maybe. Or maybe someone will actually listen. Maybe someone will see what's really happening here. A corrupt sheriff trafficking children, burning out innocents who won't cooperate. He looked at her directly. You can't run forever. At some point, you have to trust that truth matters. And if it doesn't, then at least you tried. At least you stood up and said this is wrong instead of letting them grind you into dust. His hand tightened on hers. I'll stay here. Hold the mountain. If they come looking for you, I'll send them in the wrong direction. Buy you time. Rowan, you can't fight them all alone. I'm not planning to fight. I'm planning to disappear, vanish into the high country with enough supplies to wait them out. He smiled grimly. I survived 5 years alone on this mountain before you showed up. I can manage a few more months. Mara felt tears burning behind her eyes. This isn't fair. None of this is fair. No, but it's necessary. He released her hand and stood, moving to the rafters. He retrieved the oilcloth-wrapped pages and held them out to her. Take this. Guard it with your life. It's your voice, your truth. Don't let them silence it. She took the pages, feeling their weight. They were so light, just paper and ink, but they held the power to change everything or nothing, and she wouldn't know which until she tried. When do I leave? Tomorrow at first light, before they regroup and set up pickets on the roads. He pulled out a map, spreading it on the table. You'll go north through the pass, circle wide around Briar Ridge. There's a wagon trail here. He pointed, that'll take you down to the main road. Once you reach Canyon Falls, you ask for Marshal Hendricks. Tell him Rowan Black sent you. He's an honest man, rare thing these days. You know him? Used to. He didn't elaborate, and Mara knew better than to push. He'll listen. Whether he'll act is another question. They spent the evening preparing. Rowan put together supplies, dried meat, hardtack, a canteen. He gave Mara his spare revolver, showed her how to load and fire it despite her protest. I'm not going to shoot anyone, she said. You might not have a choice. World's a dangerous place for a girl traveling alone with 4 children. He checked the weapon one last time and handed it to her. You don't have to like it. You just have to survive. The children were quiet that night, sensing the weight of what was coming. They ate the simple meal Mara prepared, beans and cornbread, nothing fancy, and huddled close to the patched-up fire. Rose climbed into Rowan's lap, something she'd never done before. He stiffened, uncertain, then slowly wrapped his arms around her small body. You're coming back, right? She asked. I'm staying here. But after Mara talks to the marshal, you'll come find us. Rowan looked at Mara over Rose's head, and she saw the doubt there. The knowledge that this might be the last time they were all together, that the world had a way of separating people who cared about each other. I'll try, he said finally. That's all I can promise. That's enough. They bedded down early. Rowan took first watch, sitting by the broken window with his rifle across his knees. Mara lay with the children arranged around her, their breathing gradually evening into sleep. But she couldn't sleep. Her mind kept spinning through everything that could go wrong. The marshal might not believe her, might arrest her on sight. The journey itself was dangerous, 50 miles through territory that was half-civilized at best, with a price on her head and 4 children to protect. She could die. They all could die. But staying meant dying slow, waiting for the next attack, the next fire, the next moment when their fragile safety shattered. At least this way, they were choosing their fate instead of waiting for it to choose them. Mara, Rowan's voice was soft. Come here. She extricated herself from the sleeping children and joined him at the window. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like thrown diamonds. The mountain was silent except for the wind in the pines and the distant call of an owl. I never thanked you, he said. For what? For bringing life back to this place. For reminding me that the world's got more in it than just pain and loss. He stared out at the darkness. After my wife and daughter died, I came here to wait out my days. Didn't see the point in anything else. Then you showed up with your dented pot and your ragtag children, and suddenly I had a reason to wake up in the morning. Rowan, let me finish. He turned to face her. I'm not good with words. Never have been. But you need to know that these months, having you here, having the children, it's been the closest thing to happy I've felt in 5 years. So if something happens tomorrow, if things go wrong, I want you to know that. You mattered. To me. Mara felt tears spill over. You matter to us too. To all of us. I know. That's why I'm letting you go. Because if I was selfish, I'd keep you here, hide you away on this mountain forever. But you deserve more than hiding. Those children deserve more. His hand found hers in the darkness. So you go tomorrow. You tell your truth. You fight for something better than what this world's given you so far. And you? I'll be here when you get back. Or I won't. Either way, you'll know I died doing something that mattered. Don't talk like that. It's just truth, Mara. Hard and unvarnished, the way truth usually is. He squeezed her hand once, then released it. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be the hardest day yet. She returned to the children, but sleep remained elusive. She lay awake listening to the night sounds, to Rowan's quiet movements as he kept watch, to the steady breathing of the children who trusted her to keep them safe. When dawn came pale and hesitant through the broken windows, Mara rose and prepared for the journey. The children woke one by one, bleary-eyed and somber. They ate a quick breakfast in silence, the weight of goodbye already pressing down on them. Rowan walked them to the edge of the clearing as the sun broke over the mountains. He knelt down, meeting each child at eye level. Thomas, you're the man of this group now. You protect your sisters, you hear me? Don't take any foolishness from anyone. Yes, sir. Lily, you keep those sharp eyes open. Trust your instincts. They've kept you alive this long. Lily nodded, her throat too tight for words. He turned to the twins, pulled them both into a rough embrace. You two stay together. Look after each other the way you always have. And remember, being small doesn't mean being weak. You're tougher than you know. Finally, he stood and faced Mara. For a moment, they just looked at each other, this broken man and this fierce girl, connected by circumstance and choice and something deeper than either had words for. You're braver than you think, he said, stronger than you know. Don't let anyone tell you different. I'll come back, she promised. Soon as I can, I'll come back. I know. He pulled something from his pocket, a small wooden horse carved from pine, the same one Mara had found on the shelf that first day. Give this to the marshal. He'll know what it means. He'll know I wouldn't send you if it wasn't important. Mara took the carving, felt its smooth curves, the love that had gone into its making. This was your daughter's. Was. Now it's yours. He stepped back, putting distance between them before the emotion could overwhelm. Go on now. Don't waste the head start I bought you. They walked away from the cabin, from the mountain, from the only real home any of them had known in years. Mara looked back once and saw Rowan standing at the edge of the clearing, his rifle in his hands, his figure stark against the morning sky. Then the trees swallowed them, and he was gone. The journey to Canyon Falls took 3 days that felt like 3 years. They moved fast but careful, avoiding the main roads, sleeping in thickets and under overhangs. Twice they saw riders in the distance and hid until they passed. Once they heard dogs and had to wade through a creek to break their scent trail. The children bore it with the endurance of those who'd known worse. But Mara saw the toll it took, the way Thomas's shoulders hunched with responsibility, the way Lily startled at every sound, the way the twins grew quieter each day. On the third evening, as the sun was setting, they crested a hill and saw Canyon Falls spread below them. It was bigger than Salvation Flats, more prosperous, with brick buildings and actual streets instead of muddy tracks. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, and Mara could hear the distant sounds of civilization, horses, voices, the clang of a smithy. That's it? Thomas asked. That's it. They descended as darkness fell, Mara leading them to a stable on the outskirts of town. The stable master was an older man with kind eyes and calloused hands. He took one look at their exhausted faces and didn't ask questions, just pointed them to an empty stall and told them to rest. Marshal's office is on Main Street, he said. Right across from the hotel. Can't miss it. Mara thanked him and got the children settled in the hay. They fell asleep almost instantly, worn to the bone. But she sat up, the oilcloth package in her lap and the wooden horse in her hand, preparing herself for what came next. At first light, she would walk into that marshal's office and tell the truth. All of it. The poverty, the desperation, Dalton's corruption, the violence that followed. She would lay bare her life and the lives of these children and hope, pray, that someone with power would actually care. It was a gamble, maybe the biggest one she'd ever taken. But Rowan was right. Running was just dying slow. At some point, you had to stand and fight, even if the odds were impossible. She thought about the mountain, about the man who'd chosen to stand alone so she could have this chance, about the cabin that had been home and sanctuary, and the first place she'd ever felt safe enough to hope. "I won't let you down," she whispered to the darkness. "I promise." The wooden horse sat silent in her palm, its carved features smooth from years of being held by loving hands. It had belonged to a child who died. Now it would speak for children who lived. Morning would come soon enough, and with it, whatever justice or judgment the world had to offer. Mara closed her eyes and waited for dawn. Dawn broke cold and clean over Canyon Falls, the kind of morning that promised clarity whether you wanted it or not. Mara woke in the stable with hay in her hair and the wooden horse still clutched in her hand, its edges pressed so deep into her palm they'd left marks. The children were still sleeping, tangled together for warmth. She watched them for a long moment, committing their faces to memory. Thomas with his mouth slightly open, Lily curled tight as a fist, the twins pressed together like two halves of a whole. If this went wrong, if the marshal arrested her on sight, these might be the last peaceful moments she'd have with them. She brushed the hay from her dress and tucked the oilcloth package inside her coat. The weight of it pressed against her ribs, solid and undeniable. Truth reduced to ink and paper, waiting to be heard or dismissed. Thomas stirred, his eyes opening slow. "Is it time?" "Soon. Let me talk to the marshal first, alone." "Mara, I need you to stay here with the others. If I'm not back in an hour, you take them and you run. You hear me? Don't wait. Don't come looking. Just run." His jaw set in that stubborn line she knew too well. "We should stay together. We stay alive. That's what matters." She gripped his shoulder. "Promise me, Thomas. Promise you'll take care of them if something happens to me." He nodded, throat working. "I promise." She slipped out of the stable into the gray morning. Canyon Falls was just waking, shopkeepers sweeping stoops, a milk wagon rattling down the main street, the smell of bread baking somewhere nearby. Normal people doing normal things, none of them aware that a fugitive child was walking among them. The marshal's office sat exactly where the stable master had said, a solid brick building with barred windows and a sign that read, "Territorial Marshal, Canyon Falls District." Mara stood across the street, gathering courage like she was collecting scattered coins. A man emerged from the office, tall and lean with silver threading his dark hair. He wore a marshal's star on his vest and carried himself with the kind of authority that didn't need to be announced. This had to be Hendricks. He paused on the steps, his gaze sweeping the street with the automatic vigilance of someone who'd spent years watching for trouble. When his eyes passed over Mara, they stopped, returned, narrowed slightly. He'd recognized her, or recognized what she was. A child alone, dusty from travel, carrying herself with the wariness of prey. He descended the steps and crossed the street, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Mara's instinct screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to stand still. She'd come here for this, for him. "Morning," he said, his voice gravelly but not unkind. "You look lost." "I'm not lost. I came to see you." "Marshal Hendricks." His eyebrows rose slightly. "You know my name." "Rowan Black told me to find you, said you were an honest man." She pulled the wooden horse from her pocket and held it out. "He said to give you this, said you'd understand." Hendricks went very still. He stared at the carving like it was a ghost, then slowly reached out and took it. His thumb traced the smooth curves, the worn places where small hands had held it over and over. "Where did you get this?" His voice had gone rough. "Rowan gave it to me 3 days ago, before I left the mountain." "He's alive then?" It wasn't quite a question, but Mara answered anyway. "He was when I left him. He stayed behind to hold off the men who were hunting us. Hendricks' eyes sharpened. Hunting you. He looked her over more carefully now, taking in her age, her worn clothes, the way she held herself like she was ready to bolt at any second. You're the girl, the one who hit Sheriff Dalton. Mara's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. I'm Mara Hale. And yes, I hit him, with a copper pot, because he was trying to take the children I was protecting. That's not how the warrant reads. The warrant's a lie. She pulled out the oilcloth package with hands that only trembled slightly. I wrote down what really happened. Everything. Rowan said you were honest enough to read it, to actually listen instead of just seeing a bounty. For a long moment, Hendricks didn't move. Then he gestured toward the office. Come inside. We'll talk proper. The children, I left them in Morrison's stable. They need to know I'm safe. I'll send someone to bring them here. They'll be looked after while we sort this out. He saw her hesitation and added, I give you my word. No one will hurt them. Mara searched his face, looking for the lie, the trap, but all she saw was a tired man holding a wooden horse and remembering something painful. All right, she said. The marshal's office was sparse but organized, a desk covered in papers, a gun rack on the wall, cells in the back with iron bars. Hendricks gestured to a chair, and Mara sat, feeling small and exposed under the morning light streaming through the window. He sent his deputy to fetch the children, then settled behind his desk and unwrapped the oilcloth. The pages crackled as he spread them out, and Mara watched his face as he read. Watched his jaw tighten, his eyes narrow, his hand curl into a fist against the desktop. When he finished, he was quiet for a long time. This is quite an accusation, he said finally. You're saying Sheriff Dalton is trafficking children, selling them to work farms and factories. I'm saying he tried to take us, and when we wouldn't go, his men burned Briar Ridge looking for us. Killed people. Rowan fought them off, but there were bodies. I saw them. Did you see Dalton in Briar Ridge or on the mountain? No, but the men who came, they were looking for the bounty. $500 he put on my head. Hendricks pulled a newspaper from his desk drawer, the same one Mara had seen weeks ago. The headline screamed about the dangerous child, the wounded sheriff, the manhunt. According to this, you attacked without provocation. Dalton was performing his legal duty, removing neglected children from an unsafe situation. That's what he wanted people to believe. Mara leaned forward. But you read my testimony. You know what really happened. He slapped Lily for talking back. He was dragging Thomas out of the room. He smiled while he did it, like he enjoyed it. I read what you wrote. That doesn't make it true. Why would I lie? I'm 12 years old. I've got 4 children depending on me and a price on my head. Coming here, trusting you with this, it's the biggest risk I've ever taken. You think I'd do that on a lie? Hendricks set down the newspaper and picked up the wooden horse again, turning it over in his hands. Rowan carved this for his daughter, Sarah. She was 6 when she died. Fever took her and her mother both, same winter. His voice went distant. He and I served together in the territorial militia. Best tracker I ever knew. When he lost his family, he just disappeared. Went up into those mountains and cut himself off from everything. He saved us, Mara said quietly. Gave us shelter when we had nowhere else to go. Taught us how to survive. And then he stayed behind so I could come here and tell the truth. And you think that truth is going to change anything? Hendricks' eyes were sharp now, assessing. You're asking me to believe that a respected sheriff is corrupt, that he's running a trafficking ring, that the entire system failed you and these children. Do you understand how hard that is to prove? How many people have a stake in looking the other way? I understand that children are being hurt, that they're being treated like property. And I understand that if someone with power doesn't do something, it's going to keep happening. Mara's hands clenched in her lap. Rowan said you were honest, that you'd listen. Was he wrong? The challenge hung in the air between them. Hendricks studied her with the kind of intensity that made Mara feel transparent, like he could see straight through to her bones. Finally, he stood. Wait here. He disappeared into a back room. Mara heard the sound of a safe opening, papers rustling. When he returned, he carried a folder thick with documents. 3 months ago, I started getting reports. Children disappearing from orphanages and poorhouses across the territory. Always the ones nobody would miss. No family, no connections. The orphanages claimed they'd been adopted, placed with good families. But when I tried to follow up, the trails went cold. He opened the folder, spreading papers across the desk. Then I found this. It was a ledger, columns of names and numbers written in neat script. Mara recognized some of the names. Children she'd known in Salvation Flats. Kids who'd vanished one day and were never mentioned again. This was in a burned wagon outside Briar Ridge. My deputy found it 2 weeks ago when we were investigating the fires. Hendricks tapped the ledger. It's a record of sales. Children bought and sold like livestock. $50 for a strong boy who can work. $30 for a girl. Less for the small ones. Mara felt sick. Who was buying them? Factories in the east, mining operations, farming combines that need cheap labor and don't ask questions. His voice was hard. And the man facilitating these transactions, collecting his percentage, making sure the supply kept flowing. Dalton. I suspected, but I couldn't prove it. The ledger doesn't have his name anywhere, just a symbol. He pointed to a mark that appeared next to certain entries, a simple D with a line through it. Without evidence connecting him directly, I couldn't move against him. He's got friends in high places, connections that go all the way to the territorial governor. But now you have my testimony. You have what he tried to do to us. I have the word of a 12-year-old fugitive against a sheriff with 20 years of service. Hendricks sat back down, his expression grave. Mara, I believe you. Every instinct I have says you're telling the truth, but belief isn't enough. I need proof. I need something that will stand up in a territorial court, something so damning that Dalton's connections can't save him. The door opened and the deputy entered with the children. Thomas came first, his eyes sweeping the room for threats. Lily followed with the twins, all of them looking frightened and exhausted. Mara stood and Rose ran to her, throwing small arms around her waist. You came back. Of course I did. Hendricks watched this reunion with an expression Mara couldn't quite read. Then he spoke to the deputy. Get them some food. Make sure they're comfortable. And find Mrs. Chen. Tell her I need her help with the children. When the deputy left, Hendricks turned back to Mara. I'm going to ask you something, and I need complete honesty. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Would you testify? In court? Under oath? Against Dalton? Would you tell this story in front of a judge and jury, knowing that Dalton's lawyers will try to destroy your credibility, that they'll call you a liar and worse? Mara thought about what that would mean. Standing in a courtroom, facing down the man she'd cracked with a copper pot. Enduring questions, accusations, the weight of adult skepticism pressing down on her 12-year-old shoulders. She thought about the children whose names filled that ledger. The ones who'd already been sold, who were working in factories and mines with no hope of escape. The ones who would come after if someone didn't stop this. Yes, she said. I'll testify. Hendricks nodded slowly. Then we're going to do this right. I'm going to send deputies to the mountain to find Rowan, bring him in to corroborate your story. I'm going to track down every name in this ledger, find the children who were sold, get their testimony too. And I'm going to build a case so airtight that even the territorial governor can't ignore it. How long will that take? Weeks. Maybe months. He saw her face fall and added, I know it's not what you want to hear, but if we move too fast, if we give Dalton any warning, he'll disappear. He'll destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, use every dirty trick he knows. We get one shot at this. We need to make it count. Thomas spoke up, his voice uncertain. What happens to us? While you're building this case, you stay here, under my protection. There's a boarding house run by Mrs. Chen. She's good people, takes in children who need help. You'll be safe there. And Mara? Lily's tone was sharp with suspicion. She's not going to jail? Not unless she wants to. Hendricks looked at Mara. Technically, I should arrest you. The warrant's legal, even if it's based on lies. But I'm choosing to interpret protective custody broadly. As far as the official record goes, you turned yourself in voluntarily and are cooperating with an ongoing investigation. It was the best she could have hoped for. Better than she'd dared to believe. But Mara couldn't shake the feeling that accepting this safety meant abandoning Rowan. "Your deputies," she said. "When they go to the mountain, they need to be careful. Rowan's expecting trouble. If they come in wrong, he might—" "I'll send men he trusts, and I'll send a letter with them, in my hand, so he knows this is legitimate." Hendricks pulled out paper and began writing. "He'll come. If there's a chance to bring Dalton down, to make this mean something, Rowan Black will come." Over the next 2 weeks, Mara learned what justice looked like when it moved with purpose instead of corruption. Hendricks worked tirelessly, sending deputies across the territory to track down leads. He brought in a prosecutor from the territorial capital, a sharp-eyed woman named Adelaide Cross, who listened to Mara's story with the kind of focused intensity that made her feel truly heard for the first time. Mrs. Chen's boarding house became home, a sprawling structure filled with other children in various states of transition, orphans, half-orphans, kids whose parents couldn't afford to keep them. The woman herself was small and fierce, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. "You're safe here," she told Mara that first night. "Whatever's chasing you, it stops at my door. Understood?" And for the first time in months, Mara let herself believe it. The children adjusted with the resilience of those who'd learned to adapt or die. Thomas found work helping the boarding house handyman, throwing himself into physical labor with the desperate energy of someone trying to prove his worth. Lily became Mrs. Chen's shadow, learning how to run a household that fed 20 children on a shoestring budget. The twins started attending the local school, their eyes going wide at the sight of real books and slates, and a teacher who didn't hit them for asking questions. Mara spent her days with Adelaide Cross, going over her testimony again and again, refining it, strengthening it, preparing for the inevitable moment when she'd have to face Dalton across a courtroom. "He'll try to break you," Adelaide warned. "He'll call you a liar, say you're unstable, claim you attacked him because you're violent and disturbed. You need to be ready for that." "I'm ready. Are you?" Because when you're on that stand and his lawyer is calling you every ugly name he can think of, when the jury is looking at you like you're something dirty, you need to hold steady. You need to remember that your words have power, but only if you don't let them shake you. Mara thought about the mountain, about Rowan standing alone against 12 men, about the copper pot and the choice she'd made in 3 seconds, about everything she'd survived to get here. "I won't break," she said. 3 weeks after Mara arrived in Canyon Falls, Hendricks's deputies returned from the mountain. They came back with Rowan. Mara was helping Mrs. Chen with laundry when she heard the commotion outside. She dropped the sheet she was folding and ran, bursting through the door to find Rowan dismounting from a horse, moving stiff and slow, like every joint hurt. "Rowan!" He turned, and his whole face changed. The hardness fell away, replaced by something that looked almost like joy. Mara ran to him, and he caught her, his arms wrapping around her with fierce strength. "You're alive," she said into his shoulder. "I was so worried. Takes more than Dalton's thugs to kill me." But his voice was rough, and she felt him trembling slightly. "You did good, kid. Hendricks told me everything, about the case, the testimony, all of it. You did real good." She pulled back to look at him. He was thinner than she remembered, with new scars on his face and hands that spoke of hard fighting. His eyes were tired, haunted by whatever he'd endured on the mountain alone. "What happened after we left?" "They came back. 3 times. Each time I sent them running with their tails between their legs. But the last group, they were professionals. Not bounty hunters. Actual hired killers." His jaw tightened. "I held them off, but they burned the cabin. Whole thing's gone now. Nothing left but ash and stones." Mara felt tears prick her eyes. The cabin, their refuge, reduced to nothing. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was just a building. You're what mattered, you and the children." He looked past her to where Thomas and the others had emerged from the boarding house. His face softened. "You're all what mattered." The children swarmed him, even Thomas abandoning his adolescent dignity to grab Rowan in a fierce hug. The twins attached themselves to his legs. Lily stood slightly apart, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. Hendricks approached, his expression grave. "We need to talk. Inside." They gathered in Mrs. Chen's parlor. Mara, Rowan, Hendricks, and Adelaide Cross. The prosecutor spread documents across the table with the efficiency of someone used to building cases from fragments. "We found 12 children from the ledger," she said. 12 who are willing to testify about where they were taken, who bought them, how they were treated. Combined with Mara's testimony about Dalton's attempt to take her and the others, we have enough to bring charges. "When?" Rowan asked. "The territorial judge arrives next week. We'll convene a grand jury, present the evidence, and get an indictment. Once we have that, we can arrest Dalton and anyone else involved in this operation." "He'll run," Rowan said flatly. "The minute he hears there's a grand jury, he'll disappear." "Not if he doesn't hear about it." Hendricks leaned forward. "We're keeping this quiet. No public announcements, no newspapers. The grand jury will be sealed. By the time Dalton knows what's happening, he'll already be in chains." Adelaide looked at Mara. "Are you ready for this? Once we move, there's no going back. You'll be the star witness. Everything depends on you holding steady under cross-examination." Mara thought about the children in the ledger, about Rose asking if they were safe, about Rowan losing everything to protect them, about the choice between hiding and standing firm. "I'm ready," she said. The grand jury convened on a gray Thursday morning in a courthouse that smelled of old wood and older secrets. Mara wore her best dress, the one Mrs. Chen had made for her, simple blue cotton with a white collar, and walked into that building with her head high and her hands steady. She told her story to 12 stern-faced citizens who listened with varying degrees of skepticism and sympathy. She told them about the poverty, the hunger, the desperation, about Dalton's visit and his threats, about the slap and the copper pot, and the terrible necessity of violence. Then Adelaide presented the ledger, the names, the prices, the systematic exploitation of children who had no one to protect them. The grand jury deliberated for 2 hours. When they emerged, they handed down indictments against Sheriff Marcus Dalton, 3 of his deputies, and 7 civilians involved in the trafficking operation. Hendricks assembled a team of marshals and rode for Salvation Flats that same day. They arrested Dalton in his office, surrounded by the symbols of authority he'd twisted into tools of oppression. According to the deputy who witnessed it, Dalton went pale when he saw the warrant, then rallied with bluster and threats about his connections. But his connections couldn't save him from the weight of evidence, couldn't erase the ledger or silence the children willing to testify. The trial was set for 3 weeks later. Those weeks crawled past with agonizing slowness. Mara spent hours with Adelaide, rehearsing her testimony until she could recite it in her sleep. Rowan stayed close, a silent, watchful presence that made her feel safer than any locked door. The children sensed the tension and grew quiet, their earlier adjustment giving way to anxious watching. Rose had nightmares. Finn stopped talking for 2 days. Thomas wore his responsibility like armor, trying to be strong for everyone and cracking under the weight. "It'll be over soon," Mara told them one evening as they sat together in the boarding house parlor. "One way or another, we'll know." "What if they don't believe you?" Lily asked. "What if they let him go?" "Then we keep fighting. We don't stop until someone listens." But privately, Mara was terrified. What if the jury sided with authority over truth? What if 12 strangers looked at her and saw only a troubled child, not a victim fighting back? The night before the trial, Rowan found her sitting alone in the courtyard. He sat beside her without speaking, just sharing the silence until she was ready to break it. "I'm scared," she admitted. "You'd be stupid not to be." "What if I mess up? What if I say the wrong thing and he walks free?" "Then you'll have tried. That's more than most people do." He looked up at the stars, the same ones that had watched over them on the mountain. "You know what I learned, living up there alone? The world doesn't care about fair. It doesn't reward courage or punish cowardice. But that doesn't mean we stop trying to do right. We do it because we're the ones who have to live with ourselves after. And if trying isn't enough, then at least we tried." He stood, offered her his hand. "Come on, you need sleep. Tomorrow's going to be the hardest day of your life, and you're going to face it with your eyes open and your voice strong. Because that's who you are, Mara Hale. You're someone who stands." The trial began on a bright autumn morning, the kind of weather that made the world seem full of possibility. The courthouse was packed, citizens curious about the scandal, journalists from as far as Denver, families of the children named in the ledger. Mara sat at the prosecutor's table, small and straight-backed, while Dalton sat across the aisle looking confident and righteous. He'd shaved, dressed in a clean suit, presented himself as the very picture of respectability. When their eyes met, he smiled. Not threatening, just knowing, like he was certain this would all blow over, that in the end authority would protect its own. Mara smiled back, a small, fierce expression that said, "We'll see." The trial lasted 5 days. Adelaide presented witness after witness, children who testified about being sold, foremen who admitted buying them, a banker who identified Dalton's handwriting in the ledger margins. She built her case brick by methodical brick, creating a structure so solid it couldn't be torn down. Then came Mara's turn. She walked to the witness stand with her heart hammering and the copper pot, admitted as evidence, sitting on the prosecutor's table like a talisman. She swore her oath and sat, looking out at the faces watching her with judgment and curiosity and, occasionally, heartbreakingly, belief. Adelaide led her through the testimony gently, establishing the context and the timeline. Then came the hard part, the cross-examination. Dalton's lawyer was a sharp-faced man named Pruitt, who approached the stand like a predator scenting weakness. "Miss Hale, you're 12 years old, is that correct?" "Yes, sir." "And you claim to have been caring for 4 children, feeding them, clothing them, keeping them safe, all at 12 years old." "I was doing the best I could." "Your best included hitting my client with a blunt object, fracturing his skull, and fleeing into the wilderness?" "My best included protecting children from a man who was going to sell them." "Sell them?" Pruitt's voice dripped skepticism. "You're accusing a decorated sheriff of human trafficking based on what? Your interpretation of his intentions?" "Based on what he said, what he did, the way he looked at them like they were property. Or perhaps you misunderstood. Perhaps a frightened child, overwhelmed by responsibilities she couldn't handle, lashed out violently when lawful authority tried to help." Mara felt anger rising, hot and dangerous. But she remembered Adelaide's coaching. Stay calm, stay factual, don't let them make you emotional. He slapped Lily across the face because she told the truth about what he does. He wasn't there to help. He was there to take. "So you say, but isn't it true that you have a history of instability? That you lived in squalor? That neighbors complained about the children's condition?" "We were poor. That's not the same as unstable." "You were 12 years old playing house with children you had no legal right to care for. That sounds unstable to me," Adelaide objected. The judge sustained it, but the damage was done. Pruitt had planted the seed of doubt. He pressed on, attacking her credibility, her judgment, her very right to speak. But Mara held steady, answering each question with the truth worn smooth by repetition. Finally, Adelaide redirected. "Mara, when Sheriff Dalton came to your home that night, what did you think was going to happen to the children?" Mara looked at Dalton, at his confident face, and let herself remember. Let herself feel again the terror of that moment. "I thought he was going to take them somewhere they'd never come back from. Somewhere they'd be used up and thrown away, just like all the other children nobody cared about." Her voice shook, but she pushed through. "I thought that if I didn't stop him, they'd disappear. And I was right, because that's exactly what he'd been doing. To children, just like us. Children who had no one." The courtroom was dead silent. "So you hit him," Adelaide said softly. "To protect them." "Yes, ma'am. I hit him because it was the only way to save them, and I'd do it again." Dalton's face had gone pale, then red. He leaned over to whisper something urgent to Pruitt, but the lawyer waved him off. The rest of the trial was a formality. The jury deliberated for 3 hours, long enough to be thorough, short enough to show certainty. When they filed back in, their faces were grave. "On the charge of human trafficking, how do you find?" "Guilty." "On the charge of corruption of office?" "Guilty." 3 more charges, 3 more guilty verdicts. Dalton stood rigid as stone while the foreman read the verdict, his illusion of respectability crumbling with each pronouncement. When it was over, when the judge had thanked the jury and ordered Dalton into custody pending sentencing, Mara felt something release inside her chest. Not quite relief. The fight had taken too much for that. But something like peace. She'd stood, she'd spoken, and 12 strangers had believed her. Outside the courthouse, Rowan was waiting with the children. Rose ran to her, and Mara caught her up, spinning her around while the little girl laughed. Thomas grinned, Lily allowed herself a small smile, and Finn just pressed close, his small hand finding hers. "You did it," Rowan said, and there was pride in his voice, rough and genuine. "We did it," Mara corrected. "All of us." Hendricks emerged from the courthouse, looking satisfied in a grim sort of way. "Judge is talking 20 years. With Dalton's testimony about his co-conspirators, we'll be able to dismantle the entire operation, find the children who were sold, bring them home." "All of them?" Mara asked. "As many as we can." His expression softened. "You gave them that chance, you and your testimony." That night, Mrs. Chen threw together an impromptu celebration. Nothing fancy, just good food and the people who'd stood with them. Rowan sat in the corner, uncomfortable with the attention, while the children devoured pie and told exaggerated stories about their adventures. Adelaide approached Mara as the evening was winding down. "You should be proud. What you did in that courtroom, that took real courage." "I was terrified the whole time." "Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's standing despite it." She paused. "Have you thought about what comes next? Where you'll go?" Mara looked around the room at her makeshift family. "I don't know. I guess that depends on a lot of things." "Well, Mrs. Chen has offered to let you stay as long as you need, and there are people, good people, who want to help. Want to make sure you and the children have real stability." It should have been comforting, but part of Mara couldn't help feeling like accepting help meant admitting she couldn't do it alone anymore, that she was giving up the fierce independence that had kept them alive. As if reading her thoughts, Rowan spoke from his corner. "Pride's a luxury, kid. Take the help. Let people do right by you for once." Later, when the children were asleep and the adults had filtered away, Mara found herself alone with Rowan in the quiet boarding house. "What about you?" she asked. "What comes next?" He was quiet for a long time. "Don't know. The mountain's gone. The cabin's ash. Don't have much reason to go back. You could stay here. Mrs. Chen's always looking for help with repairs and maintenance. 12-year-old girl trying to find me employment. World's a strange place." But he was smiling, just a little. And Mara felt hope stir, fragile and new. They'd won. Against impossible odds, against corruption and power, and the systematic cruelty of a world that treated children as disposable, they'd won. It wouldn't fix everything, wouldn't erase the scars or bring back the years of struggle. But it was something. It was justice. And for now, that was enough. The months following the trial moved like a river finding its course, sometimes rushing, sometimes still, but always forward. Winter settled over Canyon Falls with the kind of cold that made people draw closer to their fires and each other. And in Mrs. Chen's boarding house, 5 children learned what it meant to live without fear hanging over every moment. Mara watched the transformations with wonder that never quite faded. Thomas grew 3 inches and filled out through the chest, his boy's frame giving way to something stronger. He'd found work at the telegraph office, learning Morse code with the fierce concentration he brought to everything. Mrs. Chen said he had a gift for it, that his fingers flew over the key like he'd been born to the rhythm. Lily had become Mrs. Chen's unofficial second-in-command, managing the household accounts with the same sharp eyes she'd once used to track game through the forest. She was harder to read than Thomas, kept her feelings locked away behind that careful exterior, but sometimes Mara caught her smiling at nothing and knew she was healing in her own quiet way. The twins had bloomed like flowers finally given enough water. Rose's laughter rang through the house at all hours, and she'd developed a passion for drawing, covering every scrap of paper she could find with careful sketches of the people and places she loved. Finn had found his voice again, and with it a talent for storytelling that kept the younger boarding house children spellbound during the long winter evenings. And Rowan had stayed. He'd taken a room above the stable and found work as a carpenter, his mountain-hardened hands proving skilled at fine detail work. He built furniture for the boarding house, repaired what broke, and showed up every evening for supper like he'd always been part of the family. The hard edges hadn't left him entirely, probably never would, but he smiled more now, laughed occasionally, let the children climb on him without flinching away. Mara had grown too, though not in ways easily measured. She was taller, stronger, her 13th birthday having come and gone with a cake, Rose had helped bake, and presents cobbled together from small sacrifices. Thomas had bought her a real hairbrush with his telegraph wages. Lily had sewn her a new dress. The twins had drawn her a picture of all of them together on the mountain. Rowan had carved her a small wooden replica of the copper pot, so detailed she could see the dents. But the real growth was internal, invisible. She was learning to accept help without feeling weak, learning that responsibility could be shared instead of carried alone, learning that the fierce independence that had kept them alive wasn't the same thing as the strength needed to build a real life. Adelaide Cross visited often, ostensibly to check on Mara's well-being as the star witness, but really because she'd grown fond of the whole ragtag bunch. She brought news of the case's aftermath. Dalton had been sentenced to 25 years in a territorial prison, his deputies had received varying terms, and the trafficking network had been systematically dismantled. 43 children had been recovered from work farms and factories, reunited with families or placed in proper homes. "You started something," Adelaide told Mara one snowy afternoon as they sat in Mrs. Chen's parlor. "The territorial governor has created a task force to investigate orphanages and child welfare across the region. New regulations, oversight committees, the whole apparatus. It's not perfect, but it's better than it was." "Because of the trial?" "Because you refused to be silent. Because you stood up and said this is wrong, loud enough that people couldn't ignore it anymore." Adelaide smiled. "You're quite remarkable, you know, for any age, but especially for 13. Mara ducked her head, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what needed doing." That's what remarkable people always say. But despite the progress, despite the safety and the stability, Mara felt something unfinished gnawing at her. The mountain called to her in dreams, the ghost of the cabin haunting her sleep. She'd wake sometimes with the smell of pine in her nose and the sound of wind in the trees, feeling displaced and homesick for something that no longer existed. Rowan noticed. Of course he did. "You're restless," he said one evening as they walked together through the snow-quiet streets. The children were at home with Mrs. Chen, and Mara had needed air, space to think. "I'm grateful for everything here. Mrs. Chen, the boarding house, all of it. But it's not yours." She looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "This place, these people, they're good and kind and they care about you. But you didn't choose them. Circumstances pushed you together." He stopped, turning to face her fully. "The mountain, though, the cabin. That was something you chose, something you built with your own hands. The cabin's gone. So build another one." Mara stared at him. "What?" "The land's still there, the mountain's still standing, and I've been thinking—" He paused, seeming to gather words with the same care he'd used selecting timber. "I've been thinking about going back, rebuilding, making something permanent this time, not just a hermit's cave, a real home. For you, for all of us, if you want." He met her eyes, and she saw vulnerability there, carefully offered. "You, me, the children. We could have land, space, teach them to be self-sufficient, take in others who need help, the way Mrs. Chen does, but in our own way. Build something that matters." Mara's heart was hammering. "You're serious?" "I don't joke about things that matter." He looked away, watching snow fall through the lamplight. 5 years I spent on that mountain waiting to die. Then you showed up and reminded me what living was for. I'd like to keep doing that, if you're willing. Keep building instead of just surviving." "What about the children? They're settled here, they have school and friends, and ask them. See what they want. Maybe they choose to stay here, and that's fine. Maybe they want something different." He shrugged. "Either way, the offer stands. For you, for any of them who want it. A home we build together." That night, Mara gathered the children in the room they shared and laid out Rowan's proposal. She half expected resistance, attachment to the stability they'd found. But Thomas's eyes lit up immediately. "The mountain? We could go back? It wouldn't be the same. The cabin's gone. We'd be starting from nothing, building everything ourselves. It would be hard work, harder than anything here." "But it would be ours," Lily said quietly. "Not charity. Not someone else's kindness. Ours." Rose looked worried. "Would Mrs. Chen be sad if we left?" She'd understand. She knows better than anyone that children need to find where they belong. Finn spoke up, his voice still soft but gaining strength. I liked the mountain. I liked the quiet. And the stars were brighter there. They talked late into the night, weighing options, voicing fears and hopes. In the end, the decision was unanimous. They would go back. They would rebuild. Mrs. Chen cried when they told her, but she was smiling through the tears. I knew you wouldn't stay forever. You're too wild for town life, all of you. But you'll visit? You'll write? Every week, Mara promised. And we'll come down for supplies, for holidays. You're not getting rid of us that easy. Good, because I've grown rather fond of you troublemakers. She pulled Mara into a fierce hug. You've got more courage than anyone I've ever met. Go build your home. Make it something beautiful. Adelaide was more practical in her support. She helped Mara navigate the legal complexities of land ownership, got the territorial government to grant them a homestead claim on the mountain property. Call it compensation for your testimony, she said with a wink. The least the territory can do after everything you've been through. They left Canyon Falls on the first warm day of spring, when the snow was melting and the creeks were running high with runoff. The whole boarding house turned out to see them off. 20 children waving and calling goodbyes, Mrs. Chen pressing food into their hands, Adelaide slipping Mara a small purse of coins for emergencies. Rowan had acquired a wagon and 2 sturdy horses, loaded it with tools and lumber and supplies. They would camp while they built, sleep under canvas and stars until they had walls and a roof again. The journey took 4 days, retracing the path Mara had walked in terror and desperation months before. But this time was different. This time she was choosing to go towards something instead of running away. This time she had Rowan beside her, strong and steady, and the children riding in the wagon bed singing songs Finn had taught them. When they finally reached the clearing where the cabin had stood, Mara felt her breath catch. The destruction was total, blackened timbers and ash, the stone chimney standing like a tombstone amid the ruins. Spring was already reclaiming the space, wildflowers pushing up through the debris, grass greening around the foundation. It's worse than I remembered, Thomas said quietly. It's a clean slate, Rowan countered, a chance to build it right. They set up camp that first night in the meadow beyond the ruins, and as the children fell asleep around the fire, Mara and Rowan sat together in comfortable silence. Thank you, she said, for this, for believing we could do it. You've already done harder things. This is just carpentry and stubbornness. He poked at the fire with a stick. Besides, I miss the mountain, miss the quiet. Town's too loud, too crowded. Too many people asking questions. You like people more than you admit. I like our people. That's different. Over the next months, they worked like they'd been building together for years. Rowan directed the construction with the expertise of someone who understood both craft and mountain weather. They cleared the old foundation, salvaging what could be saved, the iron stove, mostly intact beneath the ash, the chimney stones, which they carefully took apart and numbered, anything metal or stone that had survived the fire. Thomas proved to have a natural talent for carpentry, his hands quick and precise. Rowan taught him to read wood grain, to measure twice and cut once, to understand how a building needed to breathe and settle. The boy absorbed it all with hungry focus, and Mara watched him transform from child to young man in the process. Lily took charge of the garden, turning a plot of mountain soil into ordered rows of vegetables. She studied seed catalogs Adelaide sent from town, experimented with different crops, kept meticulous records of what thrived and what failed. By midsummer, they had lettuce and radishes, beans climbing poles, tomatoes ripening on the vine. The twins were assigned the light work, gathering kindling, hauling water from the creek, helping Mara with cooking and cleaning. But they found their own projects, too. Rose started a wildflower garden around the perimeter, her artist eye creating beauty from native plants. Finn built elaborate forts in the forest and told stories about the trees being ancient guardians watching over them. And Mara became the center around which everything revolved. She cooked meals that fueled hard work, managed supplies with the efficiency born of years, making nothing stretch forever, and kept everyone's spirits up when the work seemed endless. The copper pot had a place of honor in their camp kitchen, dented and beloved, used daily to feed the family that had fought so hard to stay together. By the time autumn painted the mountains gold and crimson, the new cabin stood complete. It was bigger than the old one, with a sleeping loft for the children and proper windows that Rowan had bartered for in Briar Ridge. The chimney drew clean, the roof was tight against weather, and the door hung straight and true. The night they moved in, they gathered around the fireplace, still the same stones, rearranged but familiar, and just sat in the warmth, taking in what they'd accomplished. "It's beautiful," Rose whispered. "It's home," Mara corrected. But Rowan was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "It's not finished. Not yet." He disappeared outside and returned with a wooden sign, beautifully carved and sanded smooth. He'd been working on it in secret, stealing hours when no one was watching. The sign read, "Hale House, a home for those who need one." "What's this?" Mara asked, her voice catching. "A promise. And a purpose." Rowan set the sign down carefully. "We built this place with our own hands, made it strong enough to shelter more than just us. And I was thinking, there are more children out there like you were, like all of you were. Children who fall through the cracks, who get forgotten or exploited or just plain lost. You want to take them in. I want us to take them in, together, not as charity, not as some grand rescue mission, but as family, teaching them what we've learned, how to build, how to survive, how to stand up when the world tries to knock you down." He looked around at each of them. "We've all been broken. Maybe that makes us the best people to help others put themselves back together." Thomas stood straighter. "I could teach carpentry, telegraph code too once I learn it better." "I could teach gardening," Lily added, "and tracking, and how to budget on nothing." The twins looked at each other and nodded in unison. "We could teach them not to be scared," Finn said. "Show them it gets better." Mara felt tears burning her eyes, but they were good tears this time. Tears of gratitude and hope, and the overwhelming sense that maybe, just maybe, all the pain had been leading somewhere after all. "Then we do it," she said. "We make this a real home, for anyone who needs it." Word spread slowly at first, then faster. The boarding house that took in lost children. The mountain refuge run by a man who'd lost everything and a girl who'd fought a sheriff. Parents who couldn't afford to feed their children brought them to Hale House and left with the promise that their kids would be safe, taught, given a chance. Orphans found their way up the mountain trail, guided by rumors and hope. Mara developed a system. Children who came stayed at least 6 months, learning practical skills, carpentry, gardening, cooking, reading, and writing. They worked hard, but they were fed well, treated with respect, given the dignity so many had been denied. Some stayed longer, became part of the extended family. Others moved on when they were ready, carrying with them the tools to build their own lives. The copper pot became legend. Children new to Hale House would stare at it hanging above the stove, polished but still dented, and someone would tell them the story. About a 12-year-old girl who'd swung it at a corrupt sheriff. About how that one act of desperate courage had brought down a trafficking ring and changed the whole territory's approach to child welfare. "That pot saved us," Rose would say, older now but still drawing in every spare moment. Not just that night, but every day after, because it taught us that even small things, used right, can change the world. Years passed. The mountain remained constant, seasons cycling through in their eternal rhythm. Mara grew from girl to young woman, her hands still quick and capable, her voice still soft, but carrying the authority of someone who'd earned every ounce of respect she commanded. She never did grow very tall, but children looked up to her anyway, seeing in her scarred palms and steady gaze someone who understood struggle and had refused to be broken by it. Thomas left eventually, drawn by the telegraph's promise of connecting distant places. He became a telegraph operator in Denver, but he came home twice a year and sent money to help with supplies. Lily stayed longer, running the household accounts and the garden until her 20th year, when a quiet young teacher from Briar Ridge convinced her that she deserved her own home, her own family. She married him in the meadow behind Hale House, with wildflowers in her hair, and Mara crying happy tears beside her. The twins grew up strong and capable, eventually taking over much of the day-to-day operation of Hale House. Rose's drawings evolved into paintings that decorated the walls, visual stories of survival and hope. Finn's tales became the framework for teaching new children how to process their trauma, how to transform pain into narrative and find healing in the telling. Rowan aged with the grace of mountain stone, his hair going silver but his strength remaining. He and Mara never married. Some things didn't need legal recognition to be real, but they were partners in every way that mattered. Building together, teaching together, creating a legacy that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. On Mara's 25th birthday, they stood together on the porch of Hale House, watching children play in the meadow, 8 of them currently in residence ranging from 6 to 15. The copper pot was inside, simmering with stew for supper. The mountain rose behind them, eternal and protective. "Do you ever regret it?" Rowan asked. "Choosing this life? You could have gone to school, become a teacher or a businesswoman. Could have had a normal life in town." Mara thought about the scared 12-year-old she'd been, swinging a pot with everything she had because there was no other choice. Thought about the journey from that moment to this one, the pain and fear and hard-won joy. "Normal's overrated," she said, "and this life, these children, this home, this is exactly where I'm meant to be." A new child appeared at the trailhead, small and thin and carrying everything she owned in a cloth sack. Mara recognized the look in her eyes, the particular blend of hope and terror that came from having nothing left to lose. She descended the porch steps and approached slowly, making herself small and unthreatening. "Welcome to Hale House. I'm Mara. What's your name?" "Emma." The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "Well, Emma, you're safe here. Come on inside. There's stew for supper, and we'll find you a bed. Tomorrow we can talk about the rest, but tonight you just rest. All right?" The girl nodded, tears spilling over. Mara took her hand, this child's hand fitting into hers the same way Rose's once had, Thomas's, Lily's, Finn's, and led her toward the house. Inside, the copper pot simmered with enough food to feed everyone. The fire burned warm and steady. Children laughed and argued and simply existed in the safety they'd found here. Rowan met them at the door, his expression gentle. "Welcome home, Emma." And it was home. Not perfect. Home never was. But real and solid and built with their own hands from the ruins of what had been destroyed. A home that said children mattered, that the forgotten deserved to be seen, that courage could be as simple as refusing to give up. The wooden sign above the door swayed gently in the evening breeze, its carved letters catching the last of the sunlight. Hale House. A home for those who need one. That night, after the children were asleep and the fire had burned down to embers, Mara took down the copper pot and sat with it in her lap. She traced the dents with careful fingers, remembering everything this battered piece of metal represented. It had been a weapon once, swung in desperate defense, then a tool for survival, making meals from scraps. Now it was a symbol of something larger, of transformation, of resilience, of the truth that what seemed broken could become most useful, most beautiful, most necessary. "Thank you," she whispered to it, to the mountain, to the journey that had brought her here, for everything. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The mountain stood silent and strong. And in a small cabin at the edge of the wilderness, 13 people slept safe and warm, bound together not by blood but by something stronger. The choice to stand when the world said lie down, to fight when fighting seemed impossible, to build when everything had been reduced to ash. Mara Hale had been worth little, once, a forgotten child in a world that discarded children like trash. But she'd taken that worthlessness and transformed it into purpose. Taken her pain and made it into shelter for others. Taken the worst thing that had ever happened to her and turned it into the foundation of something that would outlast them all. The copper pot hung clean above the stove, waiting for tomorrow's meal. The children slept sound. And Mara, no longer a girl but not quite finished becoming whoever she would ultimately be, closed her eyes and let herself rest. She had stood, she had fought, she had won. And now, finally, she was home. The mountain kept its eternal watch, and within its embrace, the forgotten children grew strong and free, learning that their worth was never determined by how the world saw them, but by how they chose to see themselves. In the end, that was the only truth that mattered.